a bombshell report claimed that the CIA helped overthrow the U.S. government in 2020. We'll show you how this was being documented on this program years ago. A new article from Revolver News is making waves. It claims to have obtained a damning internal email that strongly suggests the CIA played a direct role in undermining and effectively overthrowing the constitutional order of the United States in 2020. Predictably, the media response has been to either ignore it, mock it, or frame it as conspiracy. But for those who have been watching closely, especially long before 2026, this is not a revelation. It is confirmation. Let me be very clear. We were talking about this in real time. I was talking about a color revolution in the summer of 2020, warning what was coming in the fall of 2020. And that's what happened. In fact, on November 16, 2020, just days after the presidential election, I warned on Worldview Radio that intelligence agencies were no longer acting as servants of constitutional government, but as permanent unelected power centers that are capable of shaping political outcomes through information control, media coordination, and of course, institutional pressure. That broadcast is still available. It exists. It is documented. And again, on February 2nd, 2023, on Worldview Radio, I revisited the issue again, laying out how intelligence agencies do not need tanks in the streets to overthrow America. They do it through narrative dominance, selective leaks, algorithmic suppression, and the weaponization of bureaucracies. In fact, at the time, many said this was speculation. But here's the part that must now be added. And it's critical, folks. Years ago, I interviewed Sidney Powell. That interview recently resurfaced and circulated again on X by, well, one of the accounts, MJ Truth Ultra. It's another piece of the historical record that people are suddenly, well, now pretending they've never seen. And during that interview that I conducted with my friend Sidney Powell, who was just here in our studios in October, we raised alarms about the intersection of election systems, intelligence influence, and institutional power. She spoke about the vulnerabilities, about forces that were operating beyond public accountability, and about a system that no longer answers cleanly to voters or even elected officials. At the time, of course, she was dismissed. She was ridiculed. She was mocked. Even people within President Trump's own orbit reportedly laughed her off behind closed doors. Media, they tried to turn her into a caricature as unstable. And eventually, the legal system came down on her personally. But she has persevered. But notice this, and this is important. They never disproved the architecture that she described. They attacked the messenger. They discredited the person to the best of their ability, but she has won because the truth has prevailed. They never dismantled this system, I'm told. And that is how power protects itself. The Revolver article, it does not stand alone. It fits into a pattern that includes intelligence officials openly bragging about fortifying the election. Former intelligence chiefs admitting to suppressing information, according to the article, and bureaucratic agencies coordinating narratives across media platforms. This is not how constitutional republics function. The CIA was never intended to be a domestic political actor. It was never meant to shape elections, curate truth, or decide which outcomes are acceptable. And yet, over time, intelligence agencies have evolved into political instruments, insulated from accountability and shielded by secrecy. That's why the Sidney Powell interview matters. Not because she was perfect, not because every claim she made was precise, but because she was pointing at the machinery, at algorithms, at software, at actors, foreign and domestic, at contracts inside the Department of Defense. And that machinery is now being exposed, I think, piece by piece. And when you connect the dots, I don't know, Venezuela, Iran, other players, you see the same worldview conflict playing out everywhere. It is not the left versus the right. It is truth versus managed reality. It is elected authority versus unelected power. It's constitutional government versus a permanent deep state bureaucracy. And the reason these stories matter, folks, whether it's Iran threatening Israel, the UN laundering terror regimes, Venezuela aligning with America's enemies, or the CIA shaping domestic outcomes, it matters because they are all expressions of the same problem: power that no longer answers to the people. So when you ask people, why are you talking about this now? The answer is simple. We're not. We've been talking about it all along for years. Remember, I showed in early 2021, I showed a letter on the air that was written December 10th, 2020, by then U.S. Congressman Bill Posey of Florida. A letter to the CIA director and the Inspector General for the CIA, asking for an investigation into the connection between the CIA and the voting machine companies. That letter was written again in December of 2020. We began reporting on it in 2021. Folks, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that our intelligence community has practiced color revolutions overseas. That's what we were warning about. That's what I was warning about in the summer of 2020 leading up to the election, because I feared that's what they were going to do here in America. I can show you an article from the Washington Times from May of 1984, where Senator Jesse Helms of North Carolina was warning about the CIA fooling around with the elections in El Salvador using computers, machines. But note, here's the lesson tonight. Has anyone been indicted? Has anyone been arrested? Has the system been officially exposed and shut down so we know we have free and fair elections going forward? Are we going to get back to paper, hand count, and one night of voting like we used to do? What this also shows is the need to persevere. Yep. Oftentimes it is a small group of people that see what's happening and have the courage to speak up, and they will continue to speak up even when being mocked and called all kinds of names. But eventually the truth will prevail. If not in this life, in the next. I can promise you that. So, thank you, Sidney Powell, for having the courage to keep going. Thank you to all the others, Mike Lindell and so many others that were out there speaking and talking, many of them who came into this studio and sat at this desk, and who have continued to do so for many years now. The truth is coming out. But now something needs to happen beyond "we told you so." Now we need real solutions so we have free and fair elections and can restore the republic. Would you like to gain access to 36 years of Christian worldview programming, news and information, all my books, ebooks, documentaries, and more? Worldviewtube.com/vault. Worldviewtube.com/vault. Understand the times, where we've been and where we're going. Worldviewtube.com/vault. Front Page Mag, they have another article out today that exposes an emerging deception, attempts by elements of the so-called woke right to portray Venezuela's Marxist dictator as a Christian. The author, he dismantles this narrative by examining the structure and ideology of Venezuela's regime. Despite using religious language and imagery, the regime remains fundamentally Marxist, committed to collectivism, centralized control, suppression of dissent, and of course, alliance and allegiance with hostile powers like Iran. The article at frontpagemag.com warns against confusing symbolism with substance. The article states bluntly, quote, "Calling Marxism Christian does not transform Marxism. It corrupts Christianity," end quote. The author notes that Venezuela's regime has persecuted genuine Christian leaders who oppose state control, while selectively elevating religious figures who align with its ideology. This deception is particularly dangerous because Venezuela has served as a strategic power and partner to Iran and other anti-Western actors. So sanitizing its ideology, well, that helps to normalize alliances that threaten, well, security in our very hemisphere. This article It concludes that moral confusion on the right is just as dangerous as deception on the left, especially when it leads to excusing tyranny in the name of cultural alignment.